Apologies, I've managed to log in as my husband, so it says Mark Robinson, but obviously my name's Hina Robinson. I'm going to talk to you about what you can do immediately, what you can start doing tomorrow if it's something that you haven't really thought about before. So, you know, before you start sort of breaking down curriculum and trying to change what you're teaching, just the kind of immediate things that you should be considering and what you can start doing in your classroom straight away. Thanks, Rachel. You can. Thanks, Rachel. So just a little bit about my background. I'm a second generation immigrant. My parents came to the UK in the 1970s, and they were working class from East Africa. So my mum was born in Tanzania, my dad was born in Kenya, and both of them have got family that have come from India. So I class myself as East African Asian, but I was born and brought up in northwest London. So surrounded by a variety of different ethnic groups, obviously my own, but also it's a very Jewish area. It had lots of people from India, from parts of Africa, all sorts. I didn't follow the expected route through education. As an East African Asian girl, you're expected to go to university at the age I was then, when I was that age, to do the STEM subjects, actually. And actually, they were quite leading in girls doing those kind of things. So medicine, dentistry, anything medical at all, anything science-based, economics, accountancy, that kind of thing to go into a profession. For me to do geography was actually a very unusual thing to do. And I did, you know, some humanities subjects at A-level, very unusual. My parents supported me through that, but all my friends were like, what are you doing, you know, of the same origins as me? What are you doing that for? Why would you want to do that? You're not going to earn as much money doing that kind of attitude. So it's important to remember that when we're looking at like how do we make geography more accessible for students from different ethnic backgrounds, it's not always about what geography is doing wrong, but about what their backgrounds are telling them to do. So I've been teaching for 21 years in South Essex. South Essex is very much a white area, but it is increasingly got diversity, actually from students that will travel into my school from East London and Romford and places like that and travel to us. So we have got a growing number of different students from different ethnic backgrounds. Thank you. So Nona mentioned what we mean by decolonising. I just want to make sure that you are understanding the difference between diversity and decolonising. The two are important and they do go hand in hand, but you do need to decolonize separately to diversity. Diversity is quite easy to think about, creating an all-inclusive atmosphere, recognizing, respecting each other's differences. It obviously covers things like sexual orientation, gender, all sorts like that as well, disability. But it's more than just that when it comes to ethnicity and backgrounds and where people are from. And the idea behind decolonizing brings into play the idea of being anti-racist, understanding the backgrounds behind the need for diversity and using those in your teaching about them and being aware of them at all times. As Nona mentioned as well, there is a political agenda here if you think about it that way, but actually we are just making our students good global anti-racist citizens, which is what we want. The fact there's a political side to it, really as teachers, we should be trying to step away from that and just focusing on what makes our students good students. And actually a lot of the students that I teach have got views where they are quite liberal and they're very much things like migration. They don't understand why there'd be an issue with migrants, but traditionally the area I come from, you would have that, let's get rid of the illegal, all the immigrants type attitudes, but they're not taking on the attitudes of their parents. So in order to keep that momentum going, they need to understand the background behind why they're doing what they're doing. Thank you. So if you think about your own school, how much do you know about your school context? So while we were working remotely, I'm sure a lot of people thought about whether their students had got online access, whether they were sharing computers with their siblings, whether they had a decent room to work in, and all of those kind of things are probably things that you've never really considered enough before we went into a lockdown situation. So developing that further, do you actually know your school's ethnic mix? Do you know where your students come from? If you have got Black students in your school, are they West African or are they from Caribbean? Are they from other parts of Africa? Where is that ethnic mix originating? Also, what generation are they? Because that has a massive impact on the way that they view things, and what kind of experiences they've had. So are they first generation, or they second or third? And that really does change the way that they view what you're talking about and view the countries that their family origin is from. Also, are they bilingual rather than being EAL? Or are they neither? I know for myself, I would actually now class English as my first language and Gujarati being my second, because I don't speak it anywhere near as much. And I certainly can't read it anywhere near as well as I can read English. So it's important not to have that assumption that they are bilingual or EAL at all. And also linked into that is the level of income and family background and educational background. Have they actually got parents that went to university, or are they from working class backgrounds that have, where no one has been on to higher education? Because again, that has an impact on the way they see things. So, you know, we're talking 20 plus years ago, but when I went to university, I was the first in my family to do so. But there was an absolute expectation that I would. There was no question about it. And that sort of depends on the generation that they are, first generation, second generation, etc., as to what is expected of them. But you need to be really careful about assumptions here. They don't always have a knowledge or interest about their background. They haven't always been to the country that their parents or grandparents came from. And in fact, some families will be trying their best to ensure that their children are what we call westernizing, and actually keeping quiet about the background from their family history, partly because they think that might mean discrimination against them, partly because they want to succeed and go into careers and things that might not have been accessible to them otherwise, potentially. But you know, if you're talking to a student, talking to a class about a particular country, say you are doing Nigeria as part of AQA GCSE, for example, to assume that children from West Africa have been to Nigeria is something that you shouldn't really try and do. To assume they've watched Nollywood films, most of them have, but again, it's not assumptions you should make. And don't be thinking, oh, I must try and include all my children's background countries, because again, it's not always possible, but sometimes it's not something that they are desperate to do, and sometimes they need to have a little bit of context first. So very important, and something that I've been talking to my students a lot about, is the danger of a single story. Traditionally, geography in the UK has been taught through an onlookers lens. That idea that the people in the Western world, as you could used to call it, in the first world, developed world, HICs, however you want to put it now, a better way of doing things. We see ourselves as saviours. Or look what urbanisation is doing to that LIC. Look what industrial development is doing. Look what population change is doing to them. So it's trying to make sure that you are looking at your country perspectives from a wide range. So, for example, urbanisation. I was actually doing with my Year 12 students today about rebranding. Gave them some city names. One of those city names being Mumbai. Right, Mumbai, what image does that bring to you? Straight away, they said slums. And I said, why do you think that? Because that's what we got taught at GCSE, the slums. Right, but Mumbai is more than that. And obviously some of them did pick up on that. We were just doing an immediate starting point. But Mumbai has got some insanely rich sections to it. It's got Bollywood, it's got a beautiful coastline. There's all sorts there that they just haven't come across, because when you're teaching about Mumbai, you may only be focusing on Dharavi, and you forget to actually look at comparing it with how the people live in that city. And while your focus might be the slums, that might be the thing that's in your syllabus, that doesn't mean that you can't ensure that students know that there is more to it than that. Development as well. Again, anecdotal, my Year 11s today, we're looking at revising development gap, and we're looking at variations across the country. Very, very clear to them, is this going to be the case? Does the whole country have the same life expectancy? Explaining no, well, why not? Giving different ideas about what might be different within the country. You know, great example here is the UK and the difference between the UK life expectancy and when you look at Glasgow, for example. And that idea that we mustn't just tell one side of something when we're looking at countries or cities or any aspect of geography, really. Thank you. And obviously resources. Now, some people might say, let's throw them all out. They're all old-fashioned. They are not trying to do what we want them to do in terms of being anti-racist or single story or They're very much stereotypical, but actually I would say still use them, but get your students to be critical of those resources. All right, so you've got two examples on the screen there. The one on the right-hand side is a picture. So I Googled African children, and that's what picture came up with. So obviously not all African children live in those conditions, not all African children live in that climate, but that is the images that you get if you Google it. So trying to get students to sort of pick that out themselves. And every time I'm using a resource in topics where we're involving other countries, I am getting my students to critically assess them. How much is this true of that place? Why are we using this resource for what we are doing? The one on the left-hand side is actually a resource from my own school, where we've tried to include different people to make resources, and this is actually from a non-specialist. So if you look at the benefits and problems of rural to urban migration, this is used at Key Stage 3. Obviously, it's going to change since I've seen it, but it's taking very simplistic benefits and problems. And again, I showed my Year 9 class this slide last week. I didn't change it before I let them see it because I wanted them to pick the issues. And the one that they looked at is the problems for rural areas, where it says there's skilled men who move, so leaving the women, children, elderly behind, and they can't always do the jobs that are needed. Well, two issues there. One, obviously, different social norms in different countries as to who does what. And secondly, the element of sexism that the women won't be able to cope. And the students, again, I said, what is wrong with any of that? Is there anything there that you think is incorrect? And they picked those issues up. So without changing any of your lessons, any of your resources going into school tomorrow, that is something that anybody can do immediately. Just look at something and say, what do you think? Is there anything wrong with this? Is this what you expect to see if you go to that country? And getting them to think about that straight away. And that involves no change in schemes of work. It doesn't involve change in lesson planning even, really, to get your students to be thinking and critically assessing any PowerPoint slides, any pictures, any videos, any textbooks. Thank you. So also going back to school context, it's thinking about the geography that the students are experiencing. This is something that Lauren Hammond at UCL has done quite a lot of research on. So, for example, saying a lot of you are in East London. What parts of London are they seeing? As students who live there of different ethnic backgrounds, are there any areas they perceive are not open to them? Do they view certain streets as being very much belonging to a particular cultural group and they wouldn't necessarily go there just because they might not fit in? So for, as an example, I'm originally from Northwest London. My school was in Golders Green, and there were parts of Golders Green that were very Jewish in terms of, on a Saturday, you'd be quite unusual to see anyone that wasn't Jewish in those areas because of the nature of the way that you live near a synagogue if you're Jewish, and where it's ultra orthodox in parts of those. So it's not somewhere that you would go out and about on a Saturday particularly. Didn't mean we were in danger if we went there. It just wasn't where you went if you weren't Jewish. So it's sort of having that idea that you are not doing geography at them, but you're doing geography with them. Are you actually teaching geography with the children, or are you teaching it to the children? So trying to bring in what they know, what they understand, and don't always assume, I've said this before, that they have visited the country they have come from. Actually take into account what they do know. And there's a lot of talk about this. Well, we only teach about the UK. Why don't we teach about rivers in another country? Why don't we teach about coastlines in a different country? That's absolutely great to do. But a lot of these students, especially if they're first generation immigrant, won't have seen the coastline that's closest to where they live now. So it is quite important to do things on coastlines, etc. And talking about, anywhere that we're looking at, how does it fit into what they know and what they understand and what they experience on a day-to-day basis? You'll have your students that have only ever been on holiday to places like Benidorm. You'll have your students that have never been out of the UK. You'll have those that only ever go and visit family in India. So all of them are having different experiences. And when you talk about tourism, when I was at secondary school, if someone talked about tourism, my experience of holidays, yes, I did go to Kenya, but it was to visit family. I didn't go on holiday as such. So, it's making sure that you're not assuming that they have certain viewpoints or certain images of a place. And again, if you're talking about, Mumbai, and you're talking about slums, students that have been to Mumbai may never have been to the area where the slums are. They may have only seen the rich part or, the more well-off part. And actually take that into account that they would have seen a different part of somewhere that what you're trying to present. So again, the idea of not having that danger of a single story. Hopefully there's something there that you can take away and use immediately in your teaching.